Sheldon Keefe calls out the team for lack of consistency. Will they respond tonight against the Stars? We'll preview that game for you and take a look at some storylines that we're watching for in the back half of the Leafs season. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of if you bet $5 or more and it wins. You can visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. What's going on, Dave? How you feeling on a Wednesday?
Feeling pretty good, Leafs are back in action, try to recover from that. No, unfortunate. Let's call it a unfortunate loss to the Islanders.
Yeah, and look, Sheldon Keefe called out his team, called them a bunch of, called the Pee-wee hockey, that play in particular, what allowed Kyle McLean get in behind the defense after coming out of the penalty box, said that's Pee-wee stuff, that's not the NHL. And he kind of doubled down a little bit at practice on Tuesday, saying that some more non-NHL quality stuff has been popping up. We'll get to those comments today and what he had to say about the team's lack of consistency. We'll preview tonight's game against the Dallas Stars. And I was just kind of thinking ahead. What am I looking forward to over the course of the next few games? There's now 38 games left for the Maple Leafs, or less. No, 34 games left for the Maple Leafs from here on out. Is that correct? 34? Quick math?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
48 plus 34 is 82, right? Yeah, okay. Glad we could do it. They said there's going to be no math in sports, yet there's so much math involved, especially for an analytics guy such as myself. Anyways, so, there's a few storylines that I think I'm curious about going forward that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. So I want to touch on what some of those might be over the course of the next few weeks. So we'll dive into those topics a little bit today as well. So kind of going deep and heavy into the Leafs content. But first, why don't we do some injury updates from practice? David Kampf, we talked about yesterday how we were going to give a David Kampf update on today's pod. The update essentially is that he was not at practice again, will not be playing in the game tomorrow, will not play this weekend either. He is out for the week, so I guess you can consider it week to week, I suppose. But will be unavailable all week with an undisclosed injury that he suffered prior to All-Star break. So no David Kampf and no Calle Jarnkrok going forward. That's not ideal for the team's penalty kill, especially with the Stars coming to town.
Yeah, it's never ideal to lose, a key part of your roster, especially down the middle. You always want to be at full strength there, but it's a little surprising because everyone's just like, oh, he's injured. When did that happen? And all of a sudden he's out for a week.
Yeah, it is kind of peculiar. And I didn't really expect that to be the case. When I first saw that he was going to be missing the game on Monday, I figured, okay, all right, he's going to miss one game is what it is. But then, Keefe came out afterward and said, oh, actually, he's not going to be available to us for the whole week. And it's like, what happened? Did he get hurt while he was gone on vacation? Apparently it was an injury that, was lingering for a little bit. They thought maybe it would get better throughout the break. Obviously it didn't. So they want to give him a week to try and nurse whatever injury it is. So that's the status of David Kampf. Not going to be in the game tonight against the Dallas Stars. There was also a mini update on Joseph Woll, who practiced with the main group today for the first time. Yesterday, Sheldon Keefe came out and said this. Monday said, not that close, despite he's been skating for the past little bit, but don't expect to see him anytime soon. And I was listening Chris Johnston on 1050 this morning on the First Up. I believe he came out and said that he's hearing late February is kind of the timeline and the target they're looking at for Joseph Woll to return. So late Feb is when Joseph Woll should be back. And I know that's something that a lot of people were curious about. Like, I don't know about you, but people know that I cover the Leafs for a living. So, the Fairweather fans are always asking me as if I have inside info and know exactly what everyone's up to. Like, when's Joseph Woll coming back? I'm like, I don't know. We haven't really heard much about him. They said maybe like a 6-week injury, and it's been roughly that. And then they said maybe post All-Star, but then you never really heard anything. And now it sounds as though maybe late February could be the target date for Joseph Woll. I'll tell you one thing. It's a good thing that Ilya Samsonov rebounded, or else I wonder if they would have tried to rush him back a little sooner. Like, I wonder if they keep kind of pushing back a little bit, making sure that he's fully 100%, because they're getting some solid goaltending out of Samsonov right now.
Yeah, I do wonder if Samsonov wasn't playing like he's been playing right now, how much do they potentially try to push Joseph Woll to get back? I mean, I don't think they're gonna do it to the point where they risk further injury, but I do think there might be a little more urgency to see him back in action. Now, if you're Sheldon Keefe, you're like, I can actually play Samsonov in net, so we don't need to rush him. Let him take his time. And like, when it comes with goaltenders and anything like ankle, knee, you want to be overly cautious because those things can easily re-injure themselves, and you don't want that to happen because you were too eager to get the guy back into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just looking, like, I don't think they have a back-to-back for a little bit. Not until February 21st, February 22nd. So a couple of weeks, and then they got a back-to-back. They're out on the road. They're in Arizona, and then they got Vegas on night 2. So maybe that could be potentially when you look to maybe bring him back into the fold. If not, maybe when they get back home from that road trip on February 27th, where they actually host the Golden Knights. So they play them twice in a 3-game span. That would be kind of the late February timeline that we're looking at right now. So there's the answer to anyone who's been asking about Joseph Woll and his status. Not as close as we thought he'd be to returning. And Chris Johnston of TSN and The Athletic and SDPN, the guys everywhere these days, hearing late February is kind of the timeline that he's suggesting of what he's hearing out there. All right. There was an interesting quote from Sheldon Keefe in practice today. So we had discussed on yesterday's podcast, Dave, how, he talked about how it was a peewee play, allowing the guy to get in behind him after coming out of the penalty box. And that can't happen in the NHL. He dropped another comment today that kind of went in a similar vein. This is what he had to say on kind of the lack of consistency when it comes to this Leafs team playing up to its potential. He said this, quote, "We've got a good team here. We've got good players. As a coaching staff, we need to do a better job with them and work with them and help them recognize our goal in getting the team to play up to its potential." And I think we've done that, I would say, about 50% of the games. We've been really good, but that's not enough. That's not enough in the NHL. Quite a comment, quite a bombshell comment, basically calling out his team and himself, right? Said that the staff doesn't have them prepared either. So in a way, he's bearing everybody, not just the players or just the staff. But ultimately, he's right. Like, it's not enough to only get up for 50% of your games. But like, I mean, is there any hope in hell in addressing that at this point, Dave? Or is this kind of what they are at this point? And then it kind of leads to that conversation. Is they need a coaching change? Is it on the players to wake up and play harder? It's a chicken or the egg discussion. But, overall, like, what did you make of those comments?
I'm going to add one more comment. This is bound back in November 27th, 2000. November 27th. To me, we've been hit and miss. There's been some inconsistency in our game, which is a little concerning. It's an area we'd like to clean up and improve upon. That was from one GM, Brad Treliving, back on November 27th. We're
Yeah.
talking almost coming up on 3 months ago. Almost.
And they're still incredibly inconsistent, night to night basis. And man, it's
So to me, it's a huge problem because the team isn't learned. And what everyone's been kind of wondering when it comes to Sheldon Keefe is the message getting through anymore? Right? There's a reason why coaching changes have been happening around the league. In some cases, like you look at Ottawa, LA, where the guy's been there for a few years, and you just wonder if the message is just not working anymore. Now, with Sheldon Keefe, is it all Sheldon Keefe? No. There's been players that have not been playing to their potential. It's clear and it's obvious. But you also wonder, is he getting the most out of the guys he needs to get the most out of? Like, it's not about the stars. The stars have to come out and play their best every night. We know that. But are the depth players have certainly not given enough. And
the stars aren't necessarily given enough. Like, look at the stats that we've seen out of Willie since he got that contract. Yep. Outside of one game where he had 2 or 3 points or something like that, or a 3 or 4 point night. Outside of that, he hasn't done nothing since getting that contract. John Tavares finally has a couple of goals here on the power play in back-to-back games. But before that, he had just one goal dating back to November. Like it's quite frustrating, I'm sure, if you're Sheldon Keefe. And like those are players who you are relying on to give you that offense. And then hopefully you get a goal or two from guys down and below your lineup. But for the last, little bit, those guys haven't been scoring. Only 6 goals out of Tyler Bertuzzi. I mean, what more could Sheldon Keefe do? He played him on the first line. He's playing him on the second line. I suppose he could try and put him up on the top power play unit, and maybe that's a way to try and get him more offense. But, like he's playing him in offensive situations. Like he's put him in places to succeed, positions to succeed. It's just not going in for him. You know what I mean? Like it's not as though Sheldon Keefe is not trying to get these guys going. And we've seen, there was a game where they put Noah Gregor up on the top. They put Pontus Holmberg up on the top line to try and get some offense from some other guys and spread the lineup a little bit. He's tried different things. So like, again, I do have a hard time solely putting this on Sheldon Keefe. I know there's a lot of people out there that think Sheldon Keefe is the problem and he needs to lose his job for this team to move forward. But I mean, is a new coach gonna get these guys to buy in any more than Keefe has? Like, I don't know, man. I really don't know. Like, there's a new coach behind the bench in Guy Boucher, right, on the power play. I mean, that power play is not as good as it were a year ago. That's a new voice. That's a new coach, right? They haven't quite really bought into what he's saying or done anything differently. They haven't played with any more urgency or consistency to their power play that they did the past couple of seasons. So I don't know, man. It's an interesting situation here for the Maple Leafs, and when it comes to this team, like I don't know. Is there any way that they can change this inconsistent play over the next 30 plus games until you get to go time in the playoffs? Because if you play like this in a 7-game series, probably gonna lose more than you win, and it'll be another early exit for them.
Yeah, the only thing I can say to that is when it comes especially to the top 6, make some. I know he's made changes, but we've seen a pretty similar lineup setup for the top 6. Maybe he needs to change something up there.
Like what? What would you suggest?
Maybe you got to move Matthews and Marner off each other for a little bit to get the other guys going a little bit here. We're talking about Tavares struggling at 5-on-5. Maybe he needs to play with Marner a little bit just to get himself going a little bit.
But he was playing with Marner, and he still wasn't scoring. Like, that's the thing. They did come off of each other's lines, and then he put them back, together semi-recently. Like, I remember a couple of weeks prior to the deadline or prior to the All-Star game, like, Tyler Bertuzzi was moved down to the third line. Like, remember that one game in Detroit where he just completely jumbled everything up and just kind of YOLO'd his lineup? Like, he's done things like that where he's taken, Nyes, put him down on the fourth line, third line, and he's popped up Holmberg, and like he's done some things. But yeah, I don't know. Eventually, it's like, to me, there's more onus on the players to get going, for the players to play up to their potential. Like, Tyler Bertuzzi to only have 6 goals is just it can't happen. Like, he was brought in to provide secondary offense, and Max Domi for that matter, who I think is like 4 goals on the year. So he's not scoring either. Both those guys were brought in specifically to add an offensive element, to add secondary scoring, and it just has not happened. And they took away defense to try and get that offense, to try and get a little bit more pissing vinegar, sandpaper, a little snot, as Tree Living called it, and some secondary scoring. And the scoring has lacked. And it's a reason why the team hasn't played as well this season. I don't know. You're 50 games in, though. Like, you would think you would know, if you're Sheldon Keefe, you would know what your team is, how to get the best out of them. And not just 50 games in. He's 5 years in with this group and this core. And he still needs to figure out ways to push the core's buttons from time to time. It's peculiar, man. It really, really is. All right, let's take a break. Let's come back and let's tee up tonight's game, Leafs and Stars. And hopefully, this team doesn't put on a peewee performance like they did against the Islanders tonight against Dallas. So we'll come back, we'll tee that up, and take a look at some of the second half storylines we're looking ahead at going into the back half, the unofficial back half of the Leafs season. So we'll do all that on the other side. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who's going to win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored. I'm pretty certain. I was taking a peek on the app earlier today, and I believe you can even play some wagers about Taylor Swift on the FanDuel Sportsbook app, and so much more. New customers, join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. We are a daily Maple Leafs-centric podcast with new episodes coming out each weekday morning, Monday through Friday. You can find the audio versions of the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from, wherever you download them. And you can also find the video version of the podcast up on YouTube as well. And the Leafs taking on the Dallas Stars tonight in Toronto. Dallas coming into the game, they've won 4 in a row. They just played last night. They beat the Buffalo Sabres 2-1. They started Jake Ottinger in that game, which means likely Scott Wedgwood, their backup, gets the start against the Maple Leafs tonight. Hometown kid from the GTA. So Toronto likely to get the easier goaltender of the two. So that should, help them with some secondary scoring, you would hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last time Toronto played Dallas, Blackwood again. Wedgwood again. I think it was like there was supposed to be this whole Ottinger versus Joseph Woll. We didn't get to see that. Yeah. So, I mean, Wedgwood's still a pretty good goalie. You have to still be cognizant of that. And we know how the Leafs tend to overestimate teams, especially when they're coming off the second half of a back-to-back.
Yeah. I'll say this, though. They've got a really good record against Dallas over the last few years. And even Scott Wedgwood has struggled against Toronto. He's just 1-2-2 with a .395 goals against and an .877 save percentage. So, Wedgwood hasn't been that no-name goalie who consistently, comes out and beats Toronto like we've seen in the past. They've had their success against Scott Wedgwood. But you look at Toronto against Dallas over the course of the last 10 games, they've won 5 in a row against the Stars and 8 of their last 10. So, Toronto, they match up well against the Stars, and they'll look to do the same and try and get another victory tonight.
Yeah, it's still a very solid team. We've seen how Toronto has played against even playoff caliber teams. They have certainly struggled. Dallas is. I feel like it's a tough team to really read. In my opinion, they made quite a few changes, especially up front in the offseason. Like they added some pretty, they add Duchesne, which was I thought.
Well, let's look at their lineup, because
Yeah,
we've got a graphic we can look at. We can look at their lineup, and then we can kind of break down who's going to be playing where tonight and what the line's going to look like. So yeah, so here's the projected starting lineup for the Dallas Stars. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so I mean, Rupe Hintz, Jason Robertson, and Wyatt Johnson, like that's a pretty solid top line. I think Rupe Hintz is one of the more underrated players in the league. Like I think he's getting a little more recognition now. He's always been underrated in my opinion. Duchesne, good old Mason Marchman, probably put some money on him to score, record a point against the Leafs. If you're looking for a little bet on FanDuel there, you got Tyler Seguin obviously making up that line. Jamie Benn on the third line is pretty interesting, considering like he's signed to that huge ticket in Dallas and will be for a while. With Sam Steele and Joe Pavelski, it's again Pavelski on the third line. That's not going to be an easy matchup there. And you got Smith, Fasksa, and Dadonov. Like to me, that's a team that's 1 through 4 lines pretty solid to go up against.
Very deep, very, very deep. Like you talked about, you got Jamie Benn on your third line, Joe Pavelski on your third line, and then Duchesne and Sagan, Marchman, Jason Robertson. Like that top 9, like you could really match them up against most top 9s in the NHL, and it's tough to beat, obviously. So the depth is there. So Toronto's going to have their hands full, in particular their blue line going to have their hands full there, because there's also a lot of size, right? Like there's some size out there in Dallas, and hopefully Toronto can prove that they can handle that tonight against the Stars. Defensively, though, here's a player that's starting to really come into his own, Thomas Harley. He's not getting a lot of, I don't think a lot of people are talking about him. Maybe a lot of people not sure exactly who he is. But man, is he ever a really good up-and-coming young defenseman. He was a first-round pick of theirs a few years back. He's just 22 or 23 years old, but he's turning into a top-pair guy, and he is just crushing it. Two-way player. Him and Heiskanen are turning into an excellent, excellent top pair for Dallas. I'd imagine they'll be up against the Matthews line tonight trying to shut them down. And, like I said, both of them can play on both sides of the ice. So that'll be tough to beat those guys and to try and, generate as many scoring chances you can. It's tough to do against those two players. And Lindell and Hakanpää, two defensive shutdown guys, and Suter and Lundqvist as the third pair. So 1 through 4, pairs 1 through 3, very, very strong in Dallas. So this is a good lineup, a very good team. So Toronto's going to have their work cut out for them for sure. Let's take a look at the projected lineup for the Maple Leafs now heading into tonight's game. Not much, really no difference, actually, from the other night against the New York Islanders. You've still got Nyes, Matthews, and Marner together, Bertuzzi, Tavares, and Nylander. Noah Gregor with Domi and Robertson, McMahon, and, I guess no, David Kampf will not be in this game.
Yeah, it'll be Holmberg on the fourth line with.
Yeah, Holmberg will be on the fourth line, and Ryan Reeves will be there. And then Riley Brody, Benoit McCabe, Giordano, and Timothy Liljegren. And I don't think we've had a starter announced, but I assume it'll be Samsonov.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's Samsonov too. I don't remember hearing, but at this point, I think you're assuming Samsonov starting until they say we're going to go to Martin Jones.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't see why that wouldn't be the case. You still got to figure out what you have in him, and if you don't trust that he can win you games down the stretch and into the playoffs, that might have to be, a spot that the Maple Leafs are going to have to address come the trade deadline. And the only way to figure that out is to play him and play him against good teams, playoff teams that are going to make it difficult for him by, getting a lot of traffic to the goal and team that is a good rush offense. So he'll be tested plenty tonight, which brings us to the keys to the game. So why don't we check our 3 keys to the game for tonight? And I just brought up one, which is this team is a very good rush team, the Dallas Stars. They already have more rush goals, Dave, this season than they had all of last year. They lead the league in rush chances. So, I mean, that's got to be key number 1 is make sure that you defend the rush. Stay on top of pucks. Try not to pinch. If you pinch, you're going to get caught. And make sure you play sound hockey. This is a group also defensively. They'll clog up the neutral zone and they'll force turnovers. And that's also a way to get quick, transition rush chances. Don't let that happen. If you do, that could certainly come back to bite you against this Dallas Stars team. So defending the rush is going to be key tonight for the Maple Leafs. What's the second key for you, Dave?
I mean, Dallas is a very physical team, so you got to bring the physicality. Now, we saw Benoit get into a nice scrap with Horvat in the last game. Ryan Reeves going out and hitting everything he can, although he took a silly penalty by being a little too overzealous physically. But yeah, Dallas is a team that's going to try to get under your skin. We know how Jamie Benn likes to do that with Austin Matthews. The Leafs are going to have to be prepared for that. They're going to have to prepare to play with a little bit of a physical edge against this team.
Yeah, 100%. They're going to have to ramp up the physicality because that Dallas likes to play a heavy game. And then the third key that we got here, you got to get some depth scoring. Like this is a team, you look at the Dallas Stars and they score. Like I think they're a top 5 team when it comes to scoring offense and goals per game. So they're going to score, which means Toronto, you're going to have to score also to keep up with this club. And it can't just be Austin Matthews. It can't just be Marner. Can't just be Nylander, Tavares. You got to get a goal or 2 from someone else in your lineup. Got to get some secondary scoring, whether it's Tyler Bertuzzi finally potting his second goal since like November 24th or whatever that stat is. It's insane. The guy's got 1 goal in his last 27 games. It's crazy. He's got to get one from the blue line, maybe Max Domi, a little revenge goal against the Dallas Stars, perhaps. Right. Matthew Nyes, maybe, perhaps a Noah Gregor goal. I don't care. Get Nick Robertson to pot one. He's someone who actually has been providing some secondary scoring a little bit when he's in the lineup. But someone else other than the core 4 needs to start putting pucks in the back of the net, and on a consistent basis at that. And they'll need it tonight against Dallas.
They do. I remember Nick Robertson, a come out game for him was against Dallas, right? The whole matchup, Nick versus Jason. And it was the Leafs that came away with the win because Nick Robertson had that amazing effort in overtime to score, right? You need that. We just mentioned how deep this Dallas Stars team is. You're not going to be able to shelter your bottom 6. And they'll gladly go head to head with the Leafs core 4, with the Leafs top 6. It's now to that 4th line, especially. They can't get stuck in their own zone. They got to play some time in the offensive zone. They got to generate some offensive chances. Otherwise, I don't know. It's going to be very tough to go head to head with this group.
Well, we'll see. Hey, Pontus Holmberg. Can you do something if you're not on a line with Marner and Matthews? Can you generate something on your own?
Yep.
We'll see. Hopefully you can. If that's the case, then you're doing a service to yourself when it comes to becoming a nightly staple in the lineup. Because if he can't provide any more offense, he's one of those tweener guys. He's someone who they can send down to the minors without having to put anyone on waivers. He can go up and down willy-nilly. And, as guys start to come back, they're going to have to start moving around some pieces, right? So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully he can prove that he can be a useful piece for this team. Yeah. But yeah, let's see if he can provide some offense in this game tonight. All right, so that's the breakdown for tonight's matchup, Leafs and Dallas Stars. It is in Toronto. It is a 7:00 puck drop. Coming up on the other side, let's take a look at some second half storylines that we're keeping an eye on as the unofficial second half of the season has now begun. We'll do that next. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring the best, way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need a hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million qualification preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast, and listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. We're a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast. Thank you so much. If you are a daily listener, we really appreciate our everydayers out there. And if you're new to the show, just stumbling across us and you've enjoyed it so far, you've made it through the full, we'll be about 30 minutes into the show. We really appreciate that. And hopefully, if you do enjoy it, you do give us a subscribe, maybe hit the little notification bell and a little like, smash that like button, as they say, on YouTube. That would be greatly appreciated. Leave us a comment. Leaving comments. Comments really help with the algorithms and helps get the, it helps, I don't know, helps people see it, I suppose, for lack of a better phrase there.
All about the algorithm. All about the algorithm.
Yeah, I don't know how the internet works, but apparently the more comments, the more likes, the more likely people are going to stumble upon
I got that
the
interaction.
video. And we can help grow the show, right? Help grow the podcast. That's what we all want here on Locked On Leafs. All right. So I guess the second half of the season started, a couple of weeks ago after game 41 going into game 42. That's when the second half truly started. But post All-Star break is like the unofficial second half. And technically the Maple Leafs, they already got one game out of the way. A loss to the New York Islanders. But I thought it'd be fun to kind of take a look at a couple of storylines that we'll be keeping an eye on, over the course of the next few weeks into the second half of this season. So here's a couple that I got. You can let me know if you've got some things that you're keeping an eye on as well, Dave. But I think right now, like a big story that we're all going to be keeping an eye on in Leafs Nation is Austin's chase for 70. Like, it's in play. It's totally in play. He's on pace for, I think, maybe now 69 goals or something around that range, 68, 69, 70 goals. Like, can he actually be the first to get to 70 since like 93? Like, can he actually get it done? It would be incredible. It'd be such a feather in the cap for him to do so. Ovi never did it. Obviously, Crosby didn't do it. And like, no one has done this since 93. So if Austin Matthews can get it done, that would be outstanding. So that's one storyline that I think we're all going to be chasing. And another one that I kind of want to keep an eye on here, and it's something that we touched on in the previous segment when we were talking about the lack of secondary scoring, is, will someone emerge with some secondary scoring? Is there someone who's going to finally put things together and put together a strong second half? I'm curious, maybe, is there someone who you think really struggled in the first half that you believe is going to have a big second half for the Maple Leafs?
It's got to be Tyler Bertuzzi.
Tyler Bertuzzi, Matthew Nyes, Max Domi. Like, I think all three of those players fit in the same bill where you got to get more out of them. I'll
put one on the blue line, and he was a bit of a spotlight today. If you haven't read David Alter's piece, Timothy Liljegren.
Yes.
he's a player that I had higher expectations for going into this year. I thought he was going to be a bona fide, cement himself into the top 4 with either with a Jake McCabe as his partner, and it hasn't happened. And unfortunately, he was the one that was the culprit on the goal, the breakaway goal that has left Sheldon Keefe pulling out whatever gray hairs he has right now.
White hairs. They
Simply put, like, we talk about this team needing to go out and trade for a defenseman, but I'm also remain adamant that you also need to get some of that improvement internally. Timothy Liljegren, as a younger defenseman that you've spent a lot of time in developing and investing to be a top 4 defenseman, hasn't done it consistently enough, and that's something that I think they need to see him improve. They really do need to see him improve, because if not, when you talk about making a trade to go out and upgrade, I wouldn't be surprised if you hear his name being thrown out there if they need to go out and make an upgrade.
I agree. I completely agree. I'm curious how many games he's played, because they say, usually for defensemen, it'll take you about 200 games to figure out who you are in the NHL. He's played 172 games. He's pretty well there. I think you pretty much know what he is. And he's a third pair defenseman. That's what he is. He's a third pair guy who, could do a little bit of everything. Like, he can play on your PK. He can play on your second unit. He's got a little bit of a shot. He can get a little bit aggressive, but he's really a master of none, I guess, which is why he's a third pair guy, and luckily he's a right shot player. So that helps him. There's not, people are always looking for right shot blue liners, but ultimately, he's someone who for sure needs to step up, because I don't think his spot in the lineup going forward is necessarily guaranteed, because, hey, if they do go out and add a top 4 right shot defenseman, like let's say the name Chris Tanev keeps coming up. If they add Chris Tanev to this lineup, who do you think's coming out?
Yeah, exactly. Like, it is going to be TJ Brodie's going to get slot further down the lineup, and it's going to be Timothy Liljegren coming out.
Either Timothy Liljegren or, Giordano. I mean, they'll alternate, right? Like, either way, he's not going to have a nightly spot in this lineup, or he'll have to fight to keep that nightly spot at the very least. If the Leafs do go out and make that move that we all kind of are expecting to happen, which leads me to another storyline. What do the Leafs do at the deadline? Where do you sit on this, Dave? Like, which camp are you in? Do you think that no matter what, the Leafs still need to try and get something out of this season and still are going to have to be, active buyers? Or do you sit in a camp where, you think the Leafs actually, they got to prove something to Treliving between now and the deadline for him to make a sizable deal? Where do you sit?
If I'm Brad Treliving, I have like a box with a key and a lock with that first round pick. That key, nothing is being happening with that first round pick right now. You are not trading that first round pick. I don't think it's worth it. They've spent too much assets. They don't have a third round pick for the next 3 years. Second round pick. Sorry. After this year, they won't have first round picks really to give out either, right? Like,
did you hear the latest on the Tanev, by the way? Apparently Calgary told Toronto. So the price is like a second and like a prospect for Tanev, or a second and a younger.
Yeah, I heard LeBron initially saying that.
Yeah, like that's the price for Chris Tanev. And apparently, since Toronto doesn't have a second, then the price is a first. They would have to get their first round pick to get it done.
I'm sorry. The only way you can ever justify paying a first round pick for Chris Tanev is if you get a contract included with that. And even then, what does that contract look like? We know his injury history. Can you rely on him to be you can't rely on him to be 82 game guy. He hasn't really been. You're like looking in like the 70 range for Chris Tanev,
which is fine if he can be healthy for the playoffs. As long as he plays every playoff game, I think you'll take 65 regular season games of Tanev if he can play 25 games in the playoffs and bring you home a Stanley Cup. You'll take that 10 times out of 10.
The thing is there? I don't think they're a Chris Tanev away from winning where they need to go, and that's where I'm at right now. They need more than that, and I think Brad Treliving is going to realize that. and maybe he'll make a small move to add some depth. I just don't think if he makes the big swing, he's not going to have enough. It's not going to be enough.
So are you saying this as if you were Brad Treliving, or are you saying this as David Morassutti?
If I was Brad Treliving, I wouldn't do it. Personally, I would not do it because you're throwing yourself into an even harder situation in the offseason where you're going to have to make even more moves to make this team better. Like, you don't have a lot of defensemen past this year.
Can I say something that is maybe equally as blasphemous?
Uh-oh.
Not that what you said is blasphemous, I suppose, but if you are not a buyer, do you then consider being a seller?
I would consider it.
Like, if you're not going to actively buy, like, I don't,
Yeah.
for me, standing pat isn't good enough.
No.
Because, you know, like, I don't think you're going to re-sign some of these guys next year anyways, if you're just standing pat because you've realized this ain't the year. You need picks and prospects pretty bad.
Yes.
Recoup some of them so that you can use those in the future to make deals that you need to get, right?
Not
So
only do you need picks and
if
prospects, you need young players.
and young players. But like, if you sit there, if you're Brad Treliving, to me, like, if I had to power rank what should the Leafs do, I think they should buy. I do think they should, but I don't think the second scenario is standing pat. I think it's buy. And if you're not going to buy and you realize this team isn't good enough to win a championship, I'm not pushing the chips in to improve this team. Then I think it's all right. Well, then what can you get for Tyler Bertuzzi? What can you get for Max Domi? Is TJ Brody attractive to teams out there? You know what I mean? Like, what can you start to get for some of these players? That may be a blasphemous thing to say, but if you decide that this year ain't it, you might as well start looking to next season. If those guys aren't going to be on your roster next season anyways, get something for it. I don't know. That's just me.
Well, and I've heard that argument too. The problem with Tyler Bertuzzi is he does have a no movement clause, but I mean, if he gets asked to waive it, he might consider it if it means going to maybe a team that has, a contender.
Well, I mean, you're trading for Tyler Bertuzzi pending UFA. You're probably going for it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, I wouldn't. I just think, you know what, with the way they played this year, their coach just said it. They've only played good enough half the time. To me, that's not a ringing endorsement for this group.
No, yeah, that's from their coach. From the coach. They've got how many games between now and the trade deadline? Let me quickly look that up. Toronto schedule. Deadline's what? The 8th? March 8th. So, like, we got a month to go, which means there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 games. There's 15 games between now and the trade deadline for the Maple Leafs to prove to Brad Treliving that they can play with a level of consistency that can work in the playoffs. If he doesn't prove that between now and March 8th, and who they play March 7th? The Boston Bruins. Fun stuff. If they don't prove that between now and then, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what they do this season. Like I said, there's usually two camps. There is a camp there that says no matter what, you gotta go for it. That's what this team is. They're in a win now mode. They still gotta go for it no matter what. And then there is that other camp that's a little more hesitant to do so. Where Brad Treliving sits, I don't know. Maybe that's an exercise that we can kind of take a look at between now and the deadline. Perhaps maybe later on this week or next week, we can look back on Brad Treliving's previous deadlines in Calgary and maybe see if we can see some tendencies as to what he likes to do in trade deadline. Because it's a new GM. We don't really know much about how Treliving operates. Maybe that's a fun little exercise that we could do, over the next week or two. Let us know in the comment section down below if that would interest you going forward. All right, what is we'll sign off, but give me one thing that you're kind of keeping an eye on over the back half of the season here. One more storyline.
Can Joseph Woll get back to his pretty much elite form that he was showing before he got injured?
Yeah, I guess he could throw both goalies into that.
Yeah.
Right.
How does the goaltending shake out the rest of the year?
Yeah. definitely something that's going to be intriguing for Leaf fans between now and the end of the season. Absolutely. All right. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content Monday through Friday. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, leave a like if you enjoyed the video on YouTube. A comment down below would be great as well. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. Once again, Leafs Stars tonight, 7 o'clock puck drop. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.